I have been rewatching, well, not rewatching. I'm going to say I'm watching really for the first time ever Oz off from HBO. And I have to say that I think for the time, I think it's a very well written show. I did not go into it thinking I would be as entertained and just trying to binge as many episodes in whenever time I have free that I have. And I just wanted to get into it because the age group that I'm in, I wasn't like old enough to really watch Oz, and if I did, I wouldn't really get like a lot of the references or the things that were going on. And just to rewatch it and almost like how some of the storylines were relevant to what was going on in the time, like the woman that was on death row on Oz and how her story is very similar to the Susan Smith story about the woman that drowned her children, and just a few death penalty cases that I've like read on in my adult life. And I'm like, okay, this is where they got that specific storyline. And the storyline talking about like how inmates wanted to, or the inmates on death row wanted to either be taken out by either hanging, firing squad, etc., things like that. And I also want to get into the characters. So, Christopher Maloney, who has always been Detective Stabler in my life, has now, I will reference to him as both because he played both parts. Zero Crumbs Left Behind, his as Chris Keller, who is a serial killer who is also struggling with his sexuality in the series and has the most toxic relationship with Tobias Beecher. 10 toes down, like the most toxic relationship I've ever seen on any series. Harold Perrineau, he plays Augustus Hill. He is paraplegic from a fall while he was being apprehended from the police. And then Dean Winters plays Ryan O'Reilly, and his actually real life brother plays Cyril, who has a traumatic head injury that has caused him to not be able to fully comprehend. And he has a very hard time settling into prison life. And he has a really bad scene that he struggles with throughout his stay at Oz. Eamon Walker, he plays Keenan Saeed, and he is the leader of the Muslims in the series, and it just shows his progression from being a very hard nosed religious group leader, and eventually, through his own suffering, he realizes that he can help people in other, especially like racial groups and people of different social standings within the prison, and he like helps and advocates for them. And I really like, I think he was one of, or not think, he was my favorite. And then Scott William Winters is who plays Cyril. I can't believe like how much they look, I mean, they're brothers obviously, but I love that they actually scripted real brothers for the series. And then Terry Kinney plays Tim McManus, and Tim McManus is, I have a love hate for him because his character throughout the episode crosses all the boundaries that this day and age you could not get away with, as far as hooking up with coworkers, power dynamics, etc. Michael Wright, rest his soul, plays Omar White, who is a very, very troubled soul and is trying to learn how to control himself and his temper and his outbursts, but he struggles with those behaviors. And Tim McManus actually is trying to help him, but struggles with being frustrated with him and his desire to help. Luna Lauren Velez plays Gloria Nathan. She's the doctor, the prison doctor. I loved her character. My only beef with her character is so many things happen to her that if this was real life, there's no way she would still work in the prison. So she becomes the victim of a sexual assault, and there's a big gray area that has her wondering if Ryan O'Reilly actually set her up to be sexually assaulted. And her and O'Reilly have a very inappropriate attachment to one another. And I'm not going to get into it because if you haven't watched Oz, I don't want to spill it. but there are things that happen that I'm like, there's no way that this would be okay. Ernie Hudson plays Leo Glenn, the prison warden, and like it was like the part was like written for him. Aduelo Ikinyanu, I butchered his last name. I apologize. And he is Simon Edebisi, and he is a terrorist. He is the leader of the black gang in prison, and he is a monster, and he runs Oz like he is a king, and he thinks he's a king and he can do whatever he wants. But him and O'Reilly actually do work together a lot because Ryan O'Reilly sells a lot of drugs in prison, and so does Adebisi, but they work together to meet their common interest and to eliminate any enemies, like especially in the earlier seasons with the Italians that were actually the head honchos of Emerald City, which is what the experimental place that they live. So Oz was supposed to be an experimental ward for prisoners to see if they can learn to live amongst each other, get along, all of that. And this is Tim McManus's brainchild, and for the most part they learn to coexist, but every season there's some type of struggle with power dynamic. Luke Perry, bless his soul, was Jeremiah Cloutler. He was a religious evangelist, and he was the central cult leader. I mean, everything he said and did, and he was in prison for actually embezzling from his church. And let's see who else. Lance Reddick made if you remember him, he's been in everything. I'm just going to say in everything. He made a short appearance as an undercover cop who actually ends up becoming a full blown addict and ends up incarcerated because of his actions while being undercover. George Morkman is Bob Rethlau, and he is the older character, the man that's been in prison forever, and he is just your quintessential jolly old man. And then Tom Martinson is Agamemnon, and him and Bob are really close. And he actually has dug his way out of prison a couple times and bust some water pipes. So he's definitely a pain in their butts at Oz. And Catherine Erb, if you remember her as from Law and Order, um, not SVU, Criminal Intent, and she plays Shirley Bellinger, and she is the Susan Smith inspired character, and she does eventually end up passing away. I Like I said, it's a great show. It is very well written, and it was actually critically acclaimed for the time. I was shocked at the rating it received because I being my age and looking back at that time, I would think that those topics would be too much of a hot button issue to release on cable, but it was HBO. So, I mean, the skin and the nudity and all of the just tragic content of the show, that was the proper place for it to be broadcast. So that does make sense. Um if you are looking for a show to watch, definitely have a palate cleanser on deck because it does get dark and it does get sad, um, especially for Miguel Alvarez. He is the third generation in his family who has lived and been sentenced at Oz. His grandpa, who unfortunately had his tongue cut out, his father lived, or I mean, not lived, was incarcerated at Oz and died there. And from the ending, obviously, he's going to live and die at Oz. And if he ever gets out, he's definitely not going to be able to function out in the world because he has suffered so much trauma on that show. It is so sad. He has a baby, or he got his girlfriend pregnant before he was incarcerated, and then the baby's born. And at first he seemed like he didn't care about the baby, but the baby's born and he like grows to love his son, and then his son unfortunately passes away. He is in solitary confinement more times than you can count. It's just not good. And then J.K. Simmons from the insurance commercials, I will never look at him the same because he plays Vernon Schillinger. Do not butcher his last name. It's a problem if you do. And he actually, when Tobias Beecher comes to prison, Tobias is incarcerated for killing a child while drunk driving. And he's originally assigned to be in the cell with Adebisi, and he was scared. But Schillinger had him come into his cell, and he thought like he was safe, but it was all a setup. And he ends up torturing and tormenting poor Tobias to the point that he ends up performing in drag and becomes addicted to drugs because to cope. But eventually this dark side is released from Tobias Beecher, and when I say the chickens come to roost, he gets his revenge, but it this begins to perpetuate this horrible back and forth of Schillinger and Beecher getting even back and forth. And it ends up with catastrophic, tragic events. I mean, children being unalived. It's a lifelong beef. And then we had Rita Morena, and she was the nun. And I loved her. My only issue with her was that she tried to do this program where the offender and the victim could meet to try to talk and amongst themselves and heal. But when it got to Schillinger and Beecher, there's no way. There's no way somebody is going to essay you, torture you, embarrass you on a daily, and then you both have done things outside of prison to get even each other where your children are casualties. There's no talking that out. It is just like setting gasoline on a fire. So that was the one thing in the season that disappointed me. They do show the human side of the prisoners though. Like as much as they did horrible things to each other and backstabbed one another, Bob's grandson was suffering from a terminal illness, and they wanted to make a wish. And the prisoners got together and used the little money that they had, and they raised money to try to get his last wish met. And when one of the prisoners said, "Well, he's got blah 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 amount of money on him, let's try to rob him," Adebisi actually said no because this is the right thing to do. And like I love that they showed those human sides of those prisoners. But anyway, I ran a little bit longer than planned. I just wanted to do a short one. But if you haven't watched Oz, give it a shot. It's good. It's not what you think because I definitely went in thinking one thing and it's definitely another. So that's all I got. Bye.